Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to our conversation today. My name is Laura Maristani, and I'm Bitwise Industries Director of External Affairs and our navigator for our conversation today. Some quick logistics again before we jump in. So to manage this virtual room and to help us ensure your voice is included, please use the Q&A function to submit questions and feedback. We will be using your feedback and questions to guide today's conversations. A very special thanks to the National League of Cities for their partnership as we seek to highlight a successful model to increase digital equity across our communities. Bitwise Industries is also very grateful to be a partner with the City of Fresno in the National League of Cities Equitable Economic Mobility Initiative. These days, everyone is talking about digital infrastructure. But what does that really entail? Expanding internet access and meaningful access to technology doesn't just happen because you literally put fiber or Wi-Fi somewhere. The answers to what it will take to bring all the people in our nation into the digital economy lie in the very places where the most disconnected and underserved communities live. It lies in places like Fresno, California, which is the topic of our conversation today. So, how does a city like Fresno, California, develop a powerhouse tech economy? I will give you a hint. It starts with people. Specifically, it starts by seeking to engage untapped and often underestimated talent and making those the stories that anchor a technology ecosystem. Miguel Fernandez is one of those people, and here's his story.
I'm Miguel Hernandez, and my story is currently I'm in online marketing. I work with the Marcom team, and right now I'm doing analytics and also doing email marketing. It started off with me kind of going through a program that helped people who were previously incarcerated who have felonies, misdemeanors. I talked to them about my situation, and someone there named Mike, and he was really cool about it. Like he was really like, oh yeah, I want to help you. It was just a great thing. They started putting me through class training and interview training. He ended up helping me get the job at Habitat. That job had ended after 6 months. He called me months later after that job had ended, and he told me like, well, on your paperwork it said that you're interested in technology still. And I was like, yeah. He's like, well, I have a great opportunity for you. There's a class coming up. It's at a building called Bitwise. He's like, I know you never heard of it, but you gotta go there. It's free, bro. Like, you're not gonna say no to free. You gotta go. And I was like, that don't seem like it's for me, bro. Like, I was really like doubting myself at the time. I was really feeling like I'm a felon. I'm on probation. Like, it's over. Like, I'll just stick to like 9 to 5s my whole life, right? Or like stuff doesn't satisfy like my needs. At the time, I didn't have the job, so I was like, okay, well, this is perfect anyways, right? It was for Salesforce, and it was led by Melissa and Jake. I went in there thinking I was the only one who had been in trouble, and I felt like outcasted. Not like by anyone like in particular. It was just like my own self doing and like the negativity and all the stuff that I was been going through in my life. Eventually, I started to realize like a lot of people here have been in the same story as me or been in the same situations. We started working on our final project for the class. After we did our presentation, I felt really good at the time. Like, as like everyone's like happy and cheering. I'm just like, oh, like I killed it, bro. I killed it. I was shaking the whole time, sweating in the back of my head. And Jake had came up to me. He's like, dude, he's like, you and Omar killed it, and everyone else killed it. I need you to talk to Alex right now. He wants to talk to you outside. So I walk out the door. I'm like, yo, what's up, Alex? And he's like, oh man, I wanna hook you up with Arturo. He has this internship coming up, and seeing you up there, you just killed it, bro. And I want you to really talk to him for like an interview. I was acting cool there. I was like, oh, thank you, I'm glad. And I went back to my car, and I was like, like shaking the steering wheel. I'm like, dude, it's a win. I'm in. And I heard it was a paid internship, and I went even crazier. Right now, me and Omar actually kind of helping Arturo and Vanessa like lead the apprentices, and eventually like training them up to like know as much as we do. It's been like, wow, like it's happening again. It feels great. Someone like me who's been denied multiple jobs, it's been really just like you get no hope throughout. You see like all these letters coming in the mail, not accepted, not accepted, not accepted. Even though during the interview process everything's been perfect, but Bitwise is the only place that actually gave me that chance and saw me for the skill that I had. Bitwise has changed my outlook a lot because I was always skeptical about what my future's ever gonna be. I was always like, this is the downhill for my life from here. I made one mistake and my life is over. Here obviously like I'm proving to myself and hopefully a lot of other people that, change, it can always happen.
Thank you, Miguel, for sharing your story with us. Before we officially dive into specifics on stories like Miguel's and how we were able to replicate them 5,000 times plus over, I do want to invite our speakers to give us a sense of who they are and why they are with us today. So, friends, if you could join me here for a second. And could you take a minute to say hi and tell us what brings you into our conversation today? Let's start with Michelle Score.
Hey, Lauda, thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here with Council Member Maxwell and also with Jonathan from the county in Fresno. I am the Chief Workforce Officer of Bitwise Industries, and it's my absolute pleasure to help lead all things workforce at Bitwise. How does workforce get defined at Bitwise? It's everything that has to do with our training program, of which you just heard a beautiful story from Miguel. In addition, it includes our world-class technology consulting business. This is the very place in our ecosystem where our apprentices do a piece of their learning journey. I'm excited to talk more about that in a bit, and thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Michelle. So excited to have you here today. Jonathan, how about you?
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm Jonathan Dewick, Director of STEM Education for the Office of the Superintendent of Schools here in Fresno County. I've been a classroom teacher and academic coach, and now running this program supporting teachers with professional learning and coming alongside them with observing them, demonstration lessons. So I get to be an integral part of helping schools get better, helping teachers get better at what they do, but also reaching out beyond the county to statewide work and supporting all of our teachers in really making a great generation come forward.
Very grateful you could join us, Jonathan. Thank you. Council Member Maxwell.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Uh, my name is Tyler Maxwell. I'm the council member representing East Central Fresno. For those of you not familiar with the layout of Fresno, we have areas like Fresno State University and the airport in our district. Um, I am a millennial. I'm 29, so I'm representing the millennial voices here at City Hall. Um, I not only represent East Central Fresno, I grew up in the district, and it is a very blue collar, middle class district where a lot of folks have seen their wages stagnate and their rents increase over years and years. And there is a lot of poverty, there's a lot of homelessness. And my family experienced a lot of those same issues too. Now, luckily, I had a lot of opportunities to get out of that, go to a good school, and come back to Fresno and saw a lot of those same issues persisting: joblessness, homelessness. And I realized that we needed to do something about that. We needed to embrace a different kind of economy here in Fresno, namely a tech economy. And so I'm just really grateful and excited for this partnership with our friends at Bitwise. And I look forward to today's panel.
I appreciate all of you being here with us today. So let's get right to it. So Michelle, I want to start with you. Coming out of listening to Miguel's story, which fortunately had a very happy ending, one that we've seen over and over again, thanks in big part to the way that Bitwise runs its apprenticeship program. And so, leveraging public-private partnerships, Bitwise builds digital infrastructure in underestimated cities while helping to create a representative tech workforce. Key to our model are our apprentices. To talk more about that, I wonder, Michelle, if you could jump in and tell us how Bitwise is helping to build digital equity in cities across the country. So take it away.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Lauda. I think while we tell the story about digital equity and the work that Bitwise is doing, first, for the folks listening, let me root that in the Bitwise ecosystem. As Lauda mentioned, Bitwise helps build tech economies in underestimated cities. We do that by helping build digital infrastructure while upskilling the populations that have been left out of economic mobility. We do that with three strategies. The first is workforce training. The second is technology consulting. And the third piece is our real estate. Let me tell you a bit about each of the three of those. The first is workforce training, and the center of a lot of our conversation around apprentices. Inside of the workforce training journey at Bitwise, we have self-evaluation classes. We know that the communities and populations we work with oftentimes don't know what a technology sector job is. So it's our responsibility to do a lot of education to make sure that folks understand what does access and what does jobs in the tech sector look like. Then we have a pre-apprentice program that is deeply rooted in the communities where we connect with city partners. And in Fresno, we work with folks like the Fresno Housing Authority. We work with folks like Jonathan's team to help connect students who are interested in tech sector roles into our pre-apprentice programs, and also connect with a lot of the community organizations who are connected to those communities that we aim to serve, whether that's veterans organizations, reentry populations, LGBTQ populations, working to connect those community members into our workforce training program. On average, folks come into our workforce training program earning $20,000 a year or less. Once exiting our apprentice program, folks increase their earning potential by $40,000 or more per year. Our apprentice program is unique. We pay students to learn in our apprentice program. We understand the barriers that folks have before entering workforce training. Folks or issues like transportation, childcare, rent, paying bills, all of these that may be a barrier for access into a training or upskilling program. Our apprenticeship program is paid to learn, and as I mentioned earlier, those apprentices are paired with senior technologists inside of our tech consulting business to do their learning where they're working on real world projects. Some of those connected to our public-private sector partnerships, like the city, helping build the very digital infrastructure for the cities that we serve. Our technology consulting business builds world-class technology solutions. We do that with public and private partnerships. Again, here, many of our apprentices are hired into our technology consulting business, and the learning of apprentices happens paired on those real world projects. This not only helps apprentices with their learning, but it also ensures that the products and the solutions that we're building inside of technology consulting are literally shaped by the humans who use them and need them the most. Our real estate business often focuses on blighted or buildings in a downtown area that need to be revitalized. People often ask us, why the real estate piece of what you do? We believe that in revitalizing those downtown community spaces where we invite people to come in and co-work, where we build coffee shops, where we build spaces for other tech sector companies in that city to build, when a student walks into those doors for their first class, not only do they see a thriving technology ecosystem, but they literally see people who look like them, who maybe share their stories, as Miguel mentioned earlier in the video, doing the work inside of those buildings. Let me talk a little bit more about our community partnerships. I mentioned earlier that we work with folks like the Fresno Housing Authority. We work with an organization called Breaking the Chains here in Fresno. And as Laura mentioned earlier, this partnership made possible by the National League of Cities and their Equitable Economic Mobility Grant. And we're working with them to create better solutions, in this example, to connect small businesses to government resources. We're creatively partnering with the government to advance equity while enabling these apprentices doing their learning to help drive these solutions that are complex challenges facing their hometowns, built by and for the very people that they serve. Finally, the theme that I really want to leave here with is around digital equity. Digital equity, I think a lot of us maybe have heard a few years ago, we started talking about the digital divide. That was really based on hardware, but as Lauda mentioned earlier, the conversation has transformed into digital equity. Digital equity happens when individuals from communities have all of the information technology capacity that they need for full participation in their communities and society. It's necessary for us, for employment, for lifelong learning, for access to the essential services that our communities need most. And it can only be achieved via the upskilling that people closest to the very problems in tech are meant to solve. Whether a population has access to hardware, to the internet, to viable connection speeds, to broadband, and then the skills that they need to effectively use those tools and resources to succeed, whether that's in life, whether that's in employment, or staying engaged in the community that they live and serve in. It's important that digital equity remains a theme of the conversation for workforce training and tech consulting inside of the Bitwise ecosystem. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much, Michelle, for giving us that overview of the model. And it's obviously a lot more complex than that. Within that, there are so many threads that we are working on at Bitwise Industries. So one of the other pieces also, this concept of digital equity can be a little bit confusing, especially now that so many city and state and government officials are trying to figure out how do we make broadband accessible to everybody. And like I was saying at the beginning, and Michelle was walking through, that doesn't just mean that you have actual internet in the air. It means that the local communities have to have the right technology to be able to take advantage of that. And one example, one very big example, is the conversation around our schools and how much or not they are able to engage parents meaningfully. We can't engage parents meaningfully if parents can't even find information in outdated websites. And so I want to invite Jonathan to join us today to talk to us about a project that he worked with Bitwise Industries on a little while ago, and tell us a little bit more about that experience and also the project and what he's seeing in the results and the engagement. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us again today.
Thank you again. So we have a great connection with Bitwise in my office. Our superintendent here has been working with Bitwise for a few years on that pipeline of people, so much that Michelle was talking about. And my part is alongside that, where we're able to work with a company like Bitwise to create a product. So recently we had received a large grant on working with early math. And so early math is talking about birth through third grade. And when we start initially talking about birth through third grade mathematics, people don't think that that's a very difficult subject. But there's nuances, there's a lot of great things that we're doing here in this county, in this state, to support our students. So working alongside this, Bitwise was immediately a resource of how we can make this happen, what this can look like, and the difference between what a mobile app is in comparison to a web application. Making sure we're meeting all the requirements of how the grant is worded, but making it something that is worthwhile for people to use. So being able to talk with the staff, the people that were assigned to be a part of this, was beyond what we expected, beyond what we hoped for in doing this. We went into the idea of needing to build a web application and not knowing what the first step was. So we came in with ideas, we came in thoughts, we came in with not even a plan. And the people at Bitwise were able to come alongside us and guide us through what might work, what would not work, what could work as we did this. So Count Play Explore came about. We had a marketing company that was a part of this. We had people that were producers and directors in Southern California. We had the State Board of Education involved in this. So it was high stakes with a lot of big names that wanted to have a hand in what was going on here to make sure it was a great product for our families, for our community, but also for our state. So when Count Play Explore debuted, we were able to show them something that was very worthwhile, where people could engage in this, to watch the videos, to see the activities, to talk with their children, to talk with their families about this. We needed a lot of guidance for this. We didn't know what the flow would be, what it would ultimately need to look like, and how people would pick and choose what buttons they would select, what would be too many options, what are not enough options, and how do we make this enticing for people to look at. So it was a lot of learning for us, and I ended up looking very smart. Being the conduit from Bitwise to our committee, I was able to really expand their knowledge based on what I was learning. So I appreciated those who came from Bitwise to come alongside us and point us in the right direction, but also give me the words to explain to some non-tech people what that looks like. My experience prior to this with Bitwise had been to be a part of one of their coding classes. About 5 years ago, one of my sons was interested in the coding class. So I thought I'll go with him and I'll learn to code. And it took about 3 weeks for me to realize I went to learn about coding, not to code. And so that was outside of my realm of what I was interested in and was capable of doing at the time. But I learned so much about what goes on in that background. And then a few years later, to be able to join the people on Bitwise and learn about what it means to make this happen and what goes on in the background. So I was able to have that bigger picture of not just what everyone sees, but what people behind the scenes are dealing with. So when all of a sudden someone on my committee says, I want this color to change, or can this button be moved over? I can walk them through the process also of it's not just a matter of flipping a switch or dragging a button over in one spot. And so again, the people at Bitwise were so kind and helpful with what that flow, layout, perspective, even the idea of what colors would come through as we were developing the name and the look of everything. Bitwise was there to guide us through, talk us through, even lead some of our committee meetings with what we need to be considering, as I might be deficient in what that all would look like. So we really appreciated how relational and understanding people were, also how patient and encouraging they were, because they were extremely attentive and nearby. So knowing that they're just down the street from where I am, most of our meetings were still virtual, but initially we had some face to face, and that was very appreciated by that. So meeting with me, meeting with the committee, pre-meetings, post-meetings to make sure we were on the same page and guiding people through here. Count, Play, Explore became a great tool, not just at a statewide level for this grant, but we had a worldwide conference with over 8,000 attendees where we were able to debut this. So we're able to work with Bitwise to make a difference in early math across the world with what's happening. So a very exciting partnership that we're hoping to expand and grow over the coming years as we move forward. So a huge thanks to Bitwise for walking us through this process from the education perspective and what that can look like to best support the families here, but also worldwide. So thank you, Bitwise, for all that you've done.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that story. And I think part of what we're trying to do today, and obviously we are highlighting Bitwise and the model, but we're trying to also convey how important it is to have certain elements in place when you are thinking about how to leverage technology, and how do you think about creating more digital equity in your community. Technology can be overwhelming. It can feel like this big mammoth. Many of us struggle still with, dealing with our computers or Excel or our phones. And so to think like, oh, I'm going into the technology industry, or what does it mean to have a better website? Before coming here, I worked with a number of organizations that were just launching and starting up. And even them had so many questions about, how do you build a website? How do you even go to figure out, like Jonathan was talking about, what the colors of my logo should look like? It's even just knowing what questions to ask can seem completely overwhelming. But all of that is so important to be able to bring in people, whether you're a government official that is trying to engage more meaningfully with your constituents, or you are a new company, or you're a nonprofit organization, or you're a school. And so being able to have those partners, those community organizations like Bitwise that can come in and help really guide you through what questions to ask and get you to a place where you can think through what makes sense for you and what your technology that is going to deliver to folks what you want to see in the world can do. It's really important to have access to those community navigators. And so the other piece of our model is that all of this ecosystem in Fresno in particular lives in what our CEOs call these beautiful castles. And so where we are able to ensure that the folks that we're bringing into these communities can see themselves being part of technology and can be surrounded by folks and a network and mentors that can help them navigate that ecosystem. And so I wanted to invite Council Member Maxwell to paint for us what that looks like in his city, and how he has seen the city be transformed by Bitwise during the last 8 years. So, Council Member, thank you for being here again. Tell us all about Fresno.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you again. Part of the job I've been tasked with during my tenure on the city council is to change the way people think about our city, right? I went to school out of town, and you talk to anyone about Fresno, California, what do they think about? Instantly, they're thinking about, tractors, maybe a cowboy or a rodeo, rural stuff. And that is a big part of our culture. That is a huge part of our economy. Um, we are the breadbasket of not just the valley, not just the state, but the nation. But in a city like Fresno, California, that has not been enough historically to sustain a city of our size. A lot of people are surprised when I tell folks Fresno, California is the fifth largest city in the state. And we're creeping up on about 600,000 people, which is larger than some states' largest city, larger than their capital city. But compared to other major California cities, you might not recognize that because historically we've lagged when it comes to embracing technology. It was just last month our city put out smart meters for parking in downtown to where you could pay to park on your phone or with a credit card and not with quarters and pennies and nickels. It was just last week we unveiled Wi-Fi on some of our city buses. I went to school in the Bay Area and, 12, 13 years ago, that was taken for granted. You're going to have Wi-Fi on your buses. But again, Fresno has historically lagged when it comes to embracing that kind of technology. And, why is that? A large part of it goes back to our demographics here in the city of Fresno. We have nearly 1 in 3 people living at or beneath the poverty line. We have very low higher educational attainment. We have over 2,500 folks experiencing some sort of homelessness here in our city. And a major one has been the brain drain, right? We have folks attend Fresno State University, but they find a lack of adequate jobs here in the Valley and end up moving to the Bay Area or Los Angeles. And similarly, some of our brightest students that we raise here in our city, they go to school like I did in the Bay Area or down in SoCal, and they don't come back. And that was very close to being my story, right? I got into Cal and I thought I was never going to come back to Fresno. I thought this was my ticket out. Eventually ran into some family issues that brought me back to town in 2016. And it was really the best choice that I ever made because I came back to Fresno and I saw that a lot of these issues that were taking place when I was growing up here were still persisting. And as part of the reason I decided to run for local government. And we've been able to chip away at some of those technological divides, right? But a lot of this issue is too big even for government, especially if you don't have that kind of specialty at local government. And, that's me. I'm a millennial, but I'm probably not as tech savvy as I should be for my age. I'm the one calling my grandparents when I have a technology issue, not the other way around. And so that's really where folks like Bitwise, our partners in the private industry, come into play. And the first thing I want to talk about is how they've transformed downtown Fresno, a place that had been historically neglected and dilapidated. They came in and they bought and purchased property throughout downtown Fresno. I think we're up to 4 different buildings where they did an adaptive reuse of an old building. One of my favorite Bitwise locations used to be a car dealership. And now it's a place where you could learn coding, get job experience, catch up with friends, hang out, do work. And really, that's what Bitwise has been doing with our economy too, right? They're taking something old and tired and renovating it and turning it on its head, providing skills and education to folks who maybe normally wouldn't have the ability to get those skills. Minority communities, folks living in poverty, maybe the doors to a CSU or a UC are not open to those folks. But Bitwise has stepped in and been a leader at providing that training to the people of Fresno, which is huge because we as a city, if we want to get out of poverty, if we want to reduce our homeless numbers, we have to embrace this technology and this tech economy if we are to survive. And so they're really training the next generation of workforce here in the city of Fresno. And on top of that, employing dozens and dozens of people, not just here in the city of Fresno, but Madera, Merced, Bakersfield, Visalia, throughout the Central Valley. They are leading by example. And we are so appreciative to all of our friends at Bitwise for taking the lead on bridging the technological divide here in the city of Fresno. So thank you all.
Thank you, Council Member, for painting that picture of Fresno for us. And so we did promise you that this is going to be a conversation. We invite you to add your comments, feedback, and questions to the Q&A, and we will be trying to address those during our conversation today. But to get us started, there are still so much to say about what it looks like to bring technology into a place that one of the most disconnected places in the country, and a true example of the enormous challenge that a lot of our elected officials across the country are facing when they're thinking about creating access. So this is a conversation about how do you go at it holistically, really looking at engaging and creating meaningful access while also upskilling local populations. And to a lot of the folks in these conversations point, communities that stay home and are able to contribute to their local economies without having to take their talents to Silicon Valley or somewhere else across the country. So I guess what I'm going to put this question out there for whoever wants to jump in, but what characteristics of Fresno and its residents may be unexpected assets to the IT industry?
Lara, I could go ahead and jump in on that one if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
I think a lot of people, when they think about Fresno, California, they kind of have those associations, those preconceived notions, especially of this being, kind of maybe a sleepy town. But, anyone that's been to Fresno knows that's not the case. We have such a strong history of labor and agriculture and farming and doing hard work here in the Central Valley. There's so many people that want to work. And I think that's been the hard part as an elected official, right? Is people want to work. They want those kinds of jobs. It's just a matter of how do we provide those jobs? How do we train people to get those jobs? And how do we attract that kind of industry to come to Fresno? And, I work in government, but, I'm not going to beat around the bush. We haven't always been the best about doing all those things from a local government perspective. And that's why I'm just truly, honored to work with folks like Bitwise that have that kind of experience. We have the people that want to work. You guys have been training them and helping attract those kind of jobs to our valley, which is huge.
Thank you, Councilmember Michelle.
Yeah, I think I also want to chime in. I think one of the pieces that makes Fresno so unique is actually the setup of the folks on this call. That the community organizations, that local government, that community partners come together who are already doing work so actively in Fresno to connect folks who need and want this type of training and this access to incomes and earnings and tech sector jobs. There's such already a woven system of connectedness for people trying to support the constituents within the city that the model itself already lends for this to be a greater possibility because of the work that happens at the public private sector level. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, in getting folks connected, this isn't simply right that Bitwise just opens its doors and waits for people to come in. We work with community partners, we work with the local government, we work with folks at the city and county to figure out how to do deep outreach into those communities that we're aiming to serve. And I think that system is really why this model is so successful in cities like Fresno and Bakersfield and Merced.
And Jonathan, you talked a little bit about the process of navigating the technology. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about whether the people who were behind the technology had an effect on how it turned out, right? Whether it was a product that was more inclusive of the community and better able to reach the goals that you were trying to reach in terms of engagement. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Certainly. We wanted to make sure that there was access for this at the level of interest. People don't get excited when they hear there's going to be an application for mathematics, but they do get excited when we can say, here's some interesting videos, here are things you can do to engage your children, here's something simple that you can do at a base level that's going to increase your child's knowledge of numbers and counting. So when we're trying to do that, we're getting input from the people at Bitwise about what's just attractive, what's going to appeal to people, not just be something splashy and will get their attention for a little while, but for the long haul? And how do we design something that's going to keep people interested and keep them motivated to click again and to see what else is there, so that we can connect again with their child, with their student, for what that looks like? So we want to make sure that we're talking to people from various backgrounds, not just one background, but many backgrounds, because we want this to have a large scale appeal to many people. Again, we weren't doing this just for the people here in Fresno, but for the county and the state, and ultimately the world, with what they can look at and analyze to see how they can build a better math program. And that's a part of what Bitwise is also doing on a larger scale, is that pipeline of what's going to draw people in and keep them working and keep them going on here. That's a big focus on education. Even though my topic was more on things for primary, we're looking at the whole birth through community college and to the university level. How do we get kids engaged to stay in this area and to be productive members of society, and support them in doing that? There's a lot of people who can naturally do that, but there are many people who struggle to make that happen. And Bitwise is a part of that pipeline to help people get to a point where they can work and make that happen for themselves.
I appreciate that. And I think, look, another element of the conversation that everybody is trying to talk about and implement in their cities is also, how do we increase equity and inclusion, right? And so the fact is that we all carry our stories, and our stories inform how we engage with the world, and the products that we develop are going to obviously have a lot of that bias embedded into them. And so I think that acknowledging that bias is real, we part of a big part of this model is that the people behind that technology look like the communities that they serve. And so they're going to be much better equipped to be able to respond to what that community needs, but also bring those life experiences in. I think we talk about bias as if it's this horrible, awful thing. It's really important to be self-aware of how it impacts how you show up in the world. But it doesn't mean you have to tamper down who you are. You can infuse it into your work. And I think this is one of the examples of that. And a lot of the technology that Bitwise is producing it has that community perspective. And I think it's a huge asset as you think about digital equity and community and what that can look like. So I want to ask just one more question, and then I'm going to turn to the audience. How we have some folks in the audience here today, thanks to our partnership with the National League of Cities, that are thinking, they're like the council member and thinking through, how do I leverage all of these enormous amounts of resources, one-time resources that are going to cities, to make it work, and to really take communities out of systemic poverty, bring more economic opportunity. So I wonder if folks can go around the room and talk about what tips, what tools would you channel people towards that can help cities leverage these one in a lifetime dollars, a lot of them federal dollars, to bring communities into the tech economy. And maybe, council member, if we could start with you, and then we'll go around the room. And if it's tips and tools, but it's also some of the challenges you all may be grappling with as you think about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are correct. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity, especially because of COVID-19. We are receiving unprecedented amounts of funds here at the local level to, build back America, to build back the city of Fresno. And, part of that's going to go back to, fixing our broken infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our sidewalks. But a lot of that money is also going to be invested back into our economy by investing directly into people. We don't want folks to have to leave town to get the skills they need to be successful here in the city of Fresno. And so I know me and my colleagues are really excited about different opportunities about how we can engage young people, how we could partner with the private sector to provide young people with the skill sets that they need in order to embrace a tech economy. Fresno State has a lot of great programs. Fresno City College has a lot of great programs, but there's still a crack where a large part of our community falls through those cracks, especially if you have barriers to getting into higher education, right? If you're living below the poverty line, historically, if you're a person of color, you are less likely to get into, a university that has these skill sets. And so we, as a private-public partnership, need to fill those gaps where possible. And that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier. Bitwise has these trainings where if you want to learn how to build a website, if you want to learn how to code in JavaScript, they'll provide you with the skill set you need to do that, which is going to be vital for our city's future and for our economy.
Appreciate that.
I'm happy to go next. I think what COVID-19 did is amplify a lot of what, both from a digital infrastructure perspective, but also in terms of workforce and specifically upskilling, reskilling, and retraining, what type of barriers folks had in order to access those opportunities. Last year, for example, as Bitwise as a company helped build one of the largest economic recovery tools in connecting folks to both training and upskilling, as well as next employment opportunities. Pieces of that we did in partnership with the public, with local governments and the state. And what was so important about that is that work was built by apprentices. So we've been talking about them doing learning inside of the technology consulting ecosystem. And literally, their experiences helped shape the recovery tool that we built for communities across the United States. It would not have had the impact that it had if we didn't have this set of apprentices who were from Fresno, who had been disproportionately impacted due to COVID-19 in terms of access and opportunity, literally to help shape the most successful tool that we can build. I think in terms of the dollars and the recovery efforts is really also helping understand, as we talked about earlier, digital equity, and how is it really right going to school completely online? Who has access to broadband? Who has devices at home? Where are we creating different barriers? And how do we help, as we move forward into recovery and beyond? How do we help ensure that those barriers get addressed? And I think this is the time where those dollars can be very specifically targeted at those public-private partnerships to help drive those solutions forward. And I believe that the most impactful of those solutions actually happens at the city and county levels, because those governments and those folks like Councilman Maxwell and folks at the county really understand what's happening in their cities and what's needed in order to drive those digital infrastructure solutions forward. So that's it.
I would also put in the idea that not everybody wants to go to get a 4-year degree. This certificate, some kind of training, is very appealing to many people. And sometimes that's a first step to when they do go get that degree. But my own children have been looking into what else is out there. It's not just about following that typical path of I have to graduate high school, I need to go to Fresno State or the equivalent, but there's other opportunities out there. And Bitwise offers that. Here's something to get you working, get you doing something. And maybe you stick with that for the long haul. Maybe it's a stepping stone towards something else. But it opens people's eyes to you can make those steps forward without it being what the student next to you is doing, what the valedictorian in your class is doing. That is not the only way to success. And it comes in a variety of packages. And that's what I really appreciate about Bitwise, is that we will get you working, we will get you employed, and we'll also support you with what that next step might be at that point, because it's a different path for all of us. And having that recognized is an important step for many of the people here in the Valley.
And I think that's a great point too, as folks that are making decisions about how to allocate dollars to, build up their communities and create more equity and inclusion, that we can't expect to do that if we expect everybody to go through the same paths and for their pathways into the workforce to look exactly the same. And so I agree with you, Jonathan, that that's a really important point. We have a couple of questions related to expansion and how do you take a model like Bitwise, tried and tested in Fresno since 2013, to other cities, and particularly to other disconnected, underestimated cities in rural areas? I don't know, Michelle, if you want to jump in here and talk a little bit about that piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are started in Fresno, obviously, as we've mentioned, now in Bakersfield, Merced, Oakland, and Toledo, Ohio, and looking to expand. I think that the essence, though, and it's been echoed here several times, is understanding the communities where both a bitwise model is needed, but also where we have the ability to support and connect at that community level. So understanding what does workforce look like in a city, understanding what jobs are available, what training and reskilling populations, as you just mentioned, Lauda, there's a lot of alternative pathways that don't necessarily look like just a direct path into higher education. And how is it that we can provide opportunities for training that connect folks to high wage, high growth jobs via our model? When I think about, where folks have been devastated, whether it's the oil industry, whether it's the automotive industry, what are the impacts that have happened over the last 10, 15, 20 years in various communities across the United States? And how is it that a model like ours can really serve in the workforce gap that many of those cities are experiencing, whether it's a program that doesn't exist or whether there's funds that weren't available to help folks overcome those barriers to be able to attach to those training and upskilling programs, and then create an ecosystem where Bitwise comes in, where you can see yourself thriving inside of the technology sector, inside of the ecosystems in those cities.
And I would also add to that, going back to where we started this conversation, it is anchored in people. And so the people in those communities are the ones that are guiding what Bitwise can look like in their communities. So as Bitwise, there were a couple of questions around what does it look like outside of Fresno. So Bitwise right now is in the cities of Bakersfield, Fresno, Merced, and Oakland. And so in each of those cities, the model looks very different, and it is led by partnerships, very strong partnerships in those communities, community partners that tell us what it is that their communities need, and strong partnerships with government officials like Council Member Maxwell that are also the best people and the most in touch with how their communities are ticking and what is going to work. And again, those are the folks that are sort of figuring out what the model is going to look like in their communities. So we talked a little bit into Jonathan's point on the traditional and non-traditional pathways into the workforce. Does that mean that if somebody did graduate from college, they're not welcomed at Bitwise? Michelle, you want to talk about that? We have a question. Someone is looking for opportunities in tech.
Yeah. Want to mention somewhere on the screen, there's an opportunity to check out our workforce training page, and it will be dropped in the chat shortly. But we do, right, what we understand often, and I think, again, speaking to the Bitwise apprentice model, where the learning that you're doing inside of Bitwise is working on those world-class solutions projects. Often people will get stuck in the loop of the hiring process where, regardless of a credential or a degree, they don't have the work experience necessary in order to take that first entry level job. So oftentimes we're working in deep partnership with often community colleges, in a conversation with Fresno State about how do we ensure that students also get an opportunity to get some of their knowledge applied to real world projects. And so, yes, we do have space for folks who do need to get what that hands-on experience is, utilizing that software, building solutions. And importantly, and we haven't talked about this part much here, but inside of the apprenticeship, you're also getting wraparound services. It's not just that you can be a good Salesforce administrator, but how do you work cross-functionally on a team? What does that look like to work inside a professional tech environment and work across teams and systems? And that's a piece that's essential to what does it mean to get someone entry level ready for a role in the tech sector?
Councilmember Maxwell, to that point, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where you see the biggest barriers that people in your community are facing into coming into new industries, and whether Bitwise or if there are other examples of good examples of how you're seeing those barriers being bridged.
Yeah, I think historically it's kind of been a chicken and the egg issue, right? I think there's folks that want the education, there's folks that want the actual employment. A lot of those employment opportunities don't come till people get the education here locally. A lot of people here locally not going to get the education if those jobs aren't available here locally. And, as I talked about earlier, people, they want to work, they want the education. And for a long time, that hasn't really been made abundant in our community. Like I said, nearly 1 in 3 people living at or below the poverty line. That's a sign that there's a bigger issue going on here, right? That we need to embrace something new. And to me, in my opinion, that is technology. I lived in the Bay Area for 7 years, and I've seen what it could do for communities when those opportunities are made for folks, that maybe didn't have those opportunities before. And, I've knocked on tens of thousands of doors when I was running for city council. And I talked to a lot of young people and, even older people that wanted to get back into the workforce and, looking for ways to get plugged into technology. And, some of them went to school, but others I talked to, they reach out to places like Bitwise, where, it's a lot more affordable option. You don't have to get a 4-year degree. You could get plugged in instantly and get the skills that you need. And I think by having not just these public entities like public schools, which are great, but having this private sector on top of it is going to help educate enough people on how to code, on how to become savvy with technology, that we're going to start attracting more jobs from Silicon Valley here into the city of Fresno, especially now, during COVID-19, a lot more people are working from home, right? And so we've had a lot of people from the Bay Area and Silicon Valley move to Fresno because they're able to work from home now. And I think all of this is going to come together to really attract those kind of jobs that we've been hungry for such a long time.
I appreciate that. So we only have a couple of minutes left. I wonder if folks could do one quick tip. Let's say that I am looking to figure out how I do this. What is one quick tip that you would give city officials and other folks that are in decision-making authority around how they can do this in their community? Michelle.
Yes, I would say connect with and collaborate with community organizations, right? This is what drives these solutions so successfully forward. So as a government official, scanning and looking around the city to understand what is happening in workforce, what's happening in terms of jobs, what does recovery look like for the city, and then where are the opportunities where there's already pathways that exist, and where are those gaps, and who are the right collaborators to help fill those gaps that help drive the workforce and the recovery, that moment that cities are in, to drive that forward.
Thank you, Michelle. Jonathan?
I love the word that you used, Michelle, collaborators. Who's out there? We have many people in the Fresno, city of Fresno, but also surrounding areas who aren't always aware of what opportunities are out there. So as we learn about these, we need to be sharing them with other adults, with other students who are looking for what their next step could be, because it's not hidden, but it's not also completely known to everyone. So how can we collaborate and get the word out about what options people have? Because that's what people are looking for, right? Do I have to follow this one path of what one of my parents did or what one of my friends is doing? What else is available? And so getting the information out there is such a powerful tool. So that collaboration between people and agencies is so important.
Thank you, Jonathan. Council member.
Yeah, quick tip, for any elected official that might be watching this, or future elected official, whether you represent a small city, a big city, a county, embrace modesty. It's okay that, we at the government level don't have all the answers, that we don't have all the experience, and to really start working on building those private public partnerships. If you're an underestimated city like Fresno, California, that has historically been left behind, even though we're the 5th largest city in the state of California, it's time to start embracing those partnerships like we are doing and continue to do with Bitwise. They're invaluable assets to your city and to your community. At the end of the day, your job is to uplift your community. And if you could do that in-house, perfect. I suspect there's a lot of things you might not be able to do in-house. Reach out, talk to folks, make those investments and make those partnerships. It'll be for the best of your community.
I appreciate all of you and all of the feedback and the great work that you're all leading. To some of the folks who may feel that we didn't get quite to their questions, a lot of the answers are yes. And the second piece is, if you want to learn more, you can visit bitwiseindustries.com. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. And we look forward to continuing to connect and figure out how we can help more communities bring Bitwise and other similar models to their communities. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.